Have you ever wondered why? The moment you stop texting her, the moment you step back, not with bitterness, not with games, just silence, she suddenly starts to flinch. Not because she misses you, not because she realized you were the one, but because her ego took a hit, and that, to her, is far more disturbing than losing you ever was. You think silence is respect, you think it's space, you think it's your way of processing the situation, protecting your dignity, but to her it's war. It's not a gentle retreat, it's a threat, because now the spotlight's off her, the power dynamic shifts, the emotional dance you were once following stops, and the moment you stop playing, she doesn't know how to breathe. You see, when you were constantly explaining yourself, apologizing, chasing, clarifying, you were feeding her ego with every breadcrumb. Even your pain was fuel. Even your confusion validated her importance. She didn't have to respond. She didn't have to care. The simple fact that you were emotionally disrupted by her presence or absence was enough. That's how she knew she mattered. Not as a woman, but as an object of attention. Your attention. And now you've gone dark. No explanation, no arguments, no closure, just nothing. That silence isn't empty, it's heavy, it echoes. And in her mind, it starts screaming louder than any argument ever could. You didn't disappear to manipulate her. You disappeared to survive. You stopped fighting because you finally realized the fight was never fair. She wasn't loving you. She was testing how far you'd bend, how much you'd give, how deeply you'd bleed just to be seen. But not for love, not for connection, for control. Her ego isn't built on depth. It's built on reflection. How many men orbit her? How many still suffer in her name? How many still keep the shrine of her alive in their mind? And the moment you stopped bleeding, she panicked. You stepping away, that's one less mirror, one less flame she can claim she ignited. Some women don't fall in love with men. They fall in love with the power they feel when men fall in love with them. Your silence breaks that illusion, and illusions, when shattered, don't go quietly. They claw, they provoke, they bait. She might suddenly text you something sweet, a question, a meme, a memory, anything to rehook your attention without ever apologizing, without ever acknowledging the wreckage she left. Why? Because if you respond, even once, it proves she still has it. Not your heart, your attention. She doesn't want to rebuild. She wants reassurance that she's still powerful, that she's still the one you can't ignore. Don't be flattered by that. Be disgusted, because it means your pain was never invisible. It was just never important. There's a part of you that wants to reply, not to rekindle things, but to show her you're over it, to look unbothered, to keep the upper hand. But let me ask you this. Why do you need her to see that you're healed? Real healing doesn't need an audience. Silence isn't revenge. It's the absence of negotiation. It's you stepping out of the game, not because you lost, but because the game was beneath you. Her ego doesn't fear losing you. It fears you realizing you never needed her in the first place. Because once you see that, once you feel that her script stops working, she can't play cold to make you chase. She can't withdraw to make you beg. She can't breadcrumb you just to see if you'll bite. The leash is gone. And the funny thing is, she put it there. She trained you to need her attention, her validation, her approval. She watched you wait for it. And now that you've stopped waiting, she doesn't know who she is without your reflection. That's the truth most men never hear. Your silence doesn't hurt her heart. It punctures her identity. It forces her to confront the fact that she was never truly loved, just mirrored. That her value wasn't intrinsic, it was borrowed from your desire. And when that desire goes silent, so does she. And now, you're sitting there, wondering, was any of it real? All those messages, all the affection, the inside jokes, the nights she held you close, the mornings she seemed to care. You replay it like a movie you don't trust anymore. Because if it was real, why did your silence kill it? Why didn't she fight for you? Or at least ask why you disappeared? Here's why for her. The emotional rhythm was never about mutual depth. It was about response, echo, supply. As long as you were echoing her, she felt whole. The second you stopped, the illusion cracked. It wasn't love, it was performance. And your silence pulled the curtain. A lot of men can't handle this realization because it forces you to confront your own vulnerability. You weren't in love with who she really was. You were in love with the version of her you hoped she would become. You kept waiting for the moment she'd suddenly see your worth, apologize, hold you like she meant it, but she never did because she never had to. She had power, not by force, not by dominance, but by strategy. She made you prove yourself. She made you feel like loving her meant earning her. She made sure you were always a little unsure, always a little off balance, always a little too grateful to even be there. That's not love. That's training. You weren't in a relationship. You were being conditioned emotionally, mentally, spiritually to keep showing up in pain, hoping for scraps. She didn't need to manipulate you with lies. She let you believe that maybe, just maybe, if you were more patient, more giving, more understanding, she'd finally reciprocate. And when she didn't, you blamed yourself. You thought your silence would trigger reflection. You thought maybe, if you stepped away, she'd realize what she lost. But what did she really lose? Your energy, your attention, your validation, not your soul, not your truth, not your protection. Because she never wanted those things. She wanted the mirror, the echo, the constant reminder that she still had it. That even when she was cold, confusing, or cruel, you stayed. You justified it. You understood her. And that gave her more power than any love ever could. So now she's watching quietly, checking your stories, not saying a word, maybe posting something that feels pointed, maybe a subtle jab, maybe silence. But make no mistake, she notices. And what she's noticing isn't that you're gone, it's that you're not looking back. That's what breaks her ego. Because if a man can leave without a goodbye, without a breakdown, without begging for closure, that man is dangerous. Not in a toxic way, but in a way that threatens her illusion. It says, you weren't worth the war. And to a woman whose identity is built on how deeply men ache for her, that's the ultimate rejection. You see, modern dating has flipped the script. Men used to be the chasers, providers, validators. Now, many women have learned that emotional distance makes men work harder. They're told to never care more, to keep him guessing, to pull back so he'll come forward. And if he doesn't move on to the next guy, dumb enough to chase. But you didn't chase, you stopped. And in stopping, you exposed the game. You stripped away the reward system. You made it clear your energy isn't endless, and your worth isn't dependent on her recognition. That's terrifying to her, because now, she can't punish you with silence. She can't bait you with mixed signals. She can't guilt you into returning to a fire that only burns you. You don't owe her a performance. You don't owe her closure. You owe yourself the truth she never saw you as a man. She saw you as a resource. That realization hurts. It kills the fantasy, but it births something else, clarity. The kind of clarity that makes you dangerous to the next woman who tries to play the same script. Because now, you see it, you feel it, and you know how it ends. With silence, not the silence of bitterness, but the silence of a man who finally knows his value. And here's where most men stumble in that space between silence and relapse. Because the moment she notices you're gone, She doesn't chase you with vulnerability. She doesn't come with truth. She comes with tactics. Her version of missing you isn't reaching out with apology or accountability. No, it's subtler. A story meant for you, a passive-aggressive quote, a sudden like on something you posted 3 months ago. She won't break the silence with love, she'll break it with bait. Why? Because admitting she was wrong means surrendering her position. It means letting go of control. And for someone whose power was built on your emotional dependence, that's a loss she's not prepared to take. So instead, she pokes, she hints, she signals, hoping you'll bite, hoping you'll re-engage on her terms, without her ever needing to look inward. Don't fall for it. This is the part where you reclaim your mind, because you weren't just emotionally drained by her presence, you were programmed. Every time she pulled away and you chased, she learned something. Every time you over-explained, she remembered. Every time you forgave too quickly, she filed that data. And by the end of it, she had a blueprint not of who you were, but of how much she could get away with. You trained her, not with your words, but with your responses. And now, in your silence, she's trying to test the system again, not because she loves you, but because she doesn't believe you've really changed. She wants to see if the leash still works. You need to understand this. The ego doesn't need closure. It needs dominance. It needs to prove that it still matters. And if you respond even kindly, she wins. Because now, the silence is broken, and she didn't have to pay a price. No apology, no effort, no change. Just a few flicks of manipulation, and there you are again, available, explainable, open to interpretation. You think you're being mature by responding. You're not. You're being tested. Silence isn't hard because you miss her. Silence is hard because it dismantles a part of yourself, the part that needed to be needed, the part that confused suffering with loyalty, the part that called betrayal, confusion, and neglect distance. That part of you dies in silence, and that's why it hurts so damn much. You don't just lose her, you lose the version of you that was willing to tolerate her. That version of you thought love was about endurance, that pain meant it mattered, that if you just held on long enough, she'd see your worth. But she didn't, and she never would, because that version of you was useful to her, predictable, dependent, emotional, available. Now you're none of those things. Now you're quiet. You're no longer explaining. You're not circling back. You're not trying to decode mixed signals or reread old messages. You're not rewatching the movie of what could have been because you finally realize it was fiction. Beautiful, convincing fiction, but fiction nonetheless. And this is where real change begins. Not when she regrets it, but when you do. When you look back and think, how did I tolerate that? How did I let myself believe that hot and cold behavior was normal? How did I romanticize inconsistency? How did I confuse chaos with chemistry? That regret, that sting, that's growth. That's you burning the bridge behind you so you never walk back across it again. She might never reach out, or she might. But you need to understand something. Her reaching out doesn't mean she loves you. It means she misses the mirror. And if you pick up that call, or answer that text, or like that post, you become the mirror again. Don't. Let her sit in the silence she once used as punishment. Let her feel the absence she assumed you'd never create. Because the truth is she never expected you to stop. She thought the leash would always be there. She thought the button still worked. That one breadcrumb and you'd come running like before. Prove her wrong not for revenge, but for respect. Respect for yourself. Respect for the man you're becoming. The one who no longer needs a response to feel worthy. The one who doesn't seek validation through suffering. The one who walks away not to teach her a lesson, but because he finally learned his Now that you've felt the silence truly sat with it, you're starting to see what was always there, buried beneath your need to be loved, the reality that she never planned to give you what you gave her. Not fully, not consistently, maybe just enough to keep you hooked, enough to stir your imagination. But the deep, unwavering commitment you kept hoping for, that was never on her list. Because the moment you wanted more than performance, when you needed truth, stability, reciprocity, she faded. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person, but she made you feel like it was you who couldn't regulate, you who needed reassurance, you who was too sensitive, too intense, too reactive. Every time you tried to create emotional clarity, she flipped the mirror. Suddenly, your logic became pressure, your honesty became neediness, your desire for real connection became a burden. That wasn't immaturity, that was ego protection. Because if she acknowledged that you were right, that your instincts weren't wrong, she'd have to confront something she's not ready for, her own inability to love without needing control. And ego doesn't do well with accountability, so instead, it rewrites the story. She gets to be the cool, unbothered woman just doing her. You become the too much guy, the guy who overthinks, who can't handle a confident woman. And in that twisted rewrite, she gets to keep the power even as she walks away. But here's the thing, that power was never real. Because the moment you stop playing the role she cast you in, the entire story falls apart. You were her emotional insurance, a backup, a signal boost. She kept you warm, but never close. She made sure you were emotionally invested, just not too much. Because if you became a real threat to her freedom, to her ability to control the flow, she'd back off. And now that you've gone silent, the illusion of her superiority is cracking. Because for all her games, all her passive domination, she never counted on you evolving. She thought you'd break. She thought you'd snap and come crawling back with some long message trying to talk it out, but you didn't. You disappeared. And now she's forced to sit with something she spent years avoiding, the awareness that real power comes from depth, not domination. From connection, not control. From two people choosing each other, not one pulling strings and the other dancing to stay worthy. She doesn't know how to respond to that kind of man. A man who doesn't need her, not out of spite, not because he's over it, but because he's finally awake. You're not waiting anymore. Not for the text, not for the apology, not for her to come around. That version of you, the one who stayed loyal to a woman who kept you on an emotional leash, is dead. And in its place stands someone else, someone dangerous. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Clarity is her ego's greatest fear. Because with clarity, you don't chase, you don't argue, you don't react. You observe, you make decisions, you protect your peace, and you don't need to announce it. She'll feel it in your silence. She'll see it when you don't watch her story, when you don't respond to her bait, when your name doesn't show up where it used to. And maybe, just maybe, she'll feel a twinge of something real. Regret. Not because she lost a puppet, but because she lost a man she never bothered to understand. But by then, it won't matter, because the version of her that hurt you, used you, confused you, that version no longer has access. And the man you're becoming, he doesn't ask to be seen. He chooses to be invisible to anyone who treated his heart like an option. You see, when you go silent, you're not just detaching from her. You're detaching from the parts of you that used to beg for scraps. You're breaking the loop. You're closing the chapter, not with a bang, but with stillness. And in that stillness, there is power, not control, not dominance, self-respect. Now you see it. You see how the silence wasn't the punishment. It was the revelation. It didn't hurt her, it exposed her. And it didn't break you, it built you. Slowly, quietly, without applause, without validation, but with something far more permanent clarity, because now you remember how it felt to explain yourself over and over and never be heard, how it felt to send messages into the void and pretend her delay was normal, how you stayed up at night wondering what you did wrong, when, all along, you were just being trained to lower your standards and call it connection. That wasn't a relationship, that was self-erasure. But here's the brutal truth most men avoid. She didn't do this to you out of malice. She did it because it worked, because you allowed it, because every time you forgave her lack of empathy, she learned she didn't need to change. Every time you rationalized her emotional neglect, she learned your logic could be used against you. And every time you stayed, she made a mental note. This one bends. You want to know what happens to a woman's ego when a man who used to bend suddenly stands still. It panics, because your silence doesn't just remove her audience, it removes the script, the lines she's used on others, the guilt, the gaslighting, the "you're just insecure" speech. They don't land anymore. They don't work, because now you see through them, and she can feel it. Some women live in a world of emotional leverage. They don't need to lie. They just need to keep you uncertain. The moment they sense you're unsure of your value, they own the stage. Every compliment becomes a control device, every withdrawal a test, every breadcrumb a leash. But you cut the leash. You stopped explaining, you stopped begging, you stopped reacting, and that's what kills the ego, not anger, not confrontation, but indifference. The kind of indifference that doesn't need to be shouted. The kind that radiates in your silence, in your posture, in the way you move on without leaving a trace. The kind that says, I see you now, and I choose me. That choice isn't easy, because it comes with loss. The loss of the fantasy, the loss of the illusion, the loss of the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would change, that she'd wake up and realize your love was real. But she won't. Not because she's evil, but because she never had to. You were the only one who cared enough to hope. And now, that hope is dead. And in its place is something better, something cleaner, something colder. Yes, but stronger. You don't need to pretend anymore. You don't need to explain your silence, justify your boundaries, or offer emotional access to someone who fumbled it the first 100 times. You don't hate her. You just don't belong to her anymore. That's what real detachment looks like. Not rage, not bitterness, just nothing. You walked away, not because you wanted her to chase you, but because you finally stopped chasing yourself, the version of you that thought love was earned by endurance. She didn't break you. She revealed what you were too afraid to protect.